Statistically speaking, you and I have never been more connected. It's easier than ever to communicate. Social media, FaceTime, calls, so many new opportunities to engage and socialize with others. It all seems so easy, and yet it seems that humanity, these days, us humans, are growing further apart as the years go by. Modern life has made isolation feel safe, efficient. It's almost like we want to be lonely. The world is moving quickly, sometimes so quickly there's no time left for anything but work, a quick movie, and barely enough sleep. For some people, the internet genuinely is the only way to socialize because we simply have no time left. But that's exactly where the problem lies. So in today's video, let's talk about humanity to lonely epidemic, how sometimes we're not only forced to isolate, but even crave it. But first, we have to define what loneliness even is. As some of you might already know, loneliness doesn't equal being alone. Instead, it refers to the gap between desired and actual connection. The feeling that there isn't enough or that you lack connection with others. You might even feel lonely in a room full of your closest friends because they simply don't understand you, or there's something that they don't know about you, or you simply can't relate to them. Social isolation, on the other hand, is when you actually have fewer or no contact at all with other human beings. It's very important to stress this difference because later on when I talk about social isolation, I'm not actually talking about loneliness and the other way around. You'll understand why it matters then. Now, let's take a closer look at what is actually happening right now and how we've gotten here. Right now, a significant number of adults across various age groups report feeling lonely, more than before. The numbers have been increasing from 50 to 80-year-olds from 27 to 56% over the last few years. And in general, in the US, 1 in 2, which means 50% of all adults in the US, report feeling lonely, a measurable amount of loneliness. People are objectively spending less time with family and friends in real life, and rising loneliness rates are associated strongly with depression and anxiety, which are also on the rise. And while studies show that young adults are the most affected age groups, people of all ages can be affected and are affected. As we've already said now, the numbers are on the rise. And the biggest factor at play here would be the internet, which has been gaining in popularity and of course, its implications. So before we take a closer look at what actually makes us crave isolation, let's see what changes there's been in the past few years regarding technological and societal changes. For one, the average size of a family has decreased. Birth rates are lower, which means less children, and then that obviously equals to smaller families. Which means, on average, there are less people to spend time with in your own family. Of course, this is just a minor difference, but it can still change things. A contributing factor here would be that more people live farther away from their families, in different cities, countries, or even continents, which has been, for example, seen in many more people studying abroad. In general, living alone is far more common now, and marriage rates are down. Two factors that are actually connected in my opinion. There's more pressure to succeed, especially young, which by the way I made a video about, you can click on my channel. Hours aren't exactly longer on average, of course that depends on the kind of industry that you work in, but still, we have to remember that the construct of a 9 to 5 was built on the assumption that one partner stays home while the other gets to work. For a lot of people though, that isn't the case anymore, and that has to do with two different factors. One, the increased autonomy that women experience. They are not dependent on men anymore and can afford to work by themselves. The second option is that we simply can't afford to only have one partner work. If you're in a relationship and, for example, you have children, bills to pay, you simply can't afford for one person to just stay home, unless, of course, the other person has a very high income. And that, in turn, obviously leaves us with less time to spend with friends and family in real life, and instead, we spend it on the internet, which, of course, is a way to connect, but it is much quicker and less efficient. More time is spent on work and less remains to socialize, and thus we unwillingly isolate ourselves. What we're talking about here, by the way, in regards to love, marriage, and feminism, is sort of a part of the so-called male loneliness epidemic. As I've already told you in the thumbnail or the description, we're not talking about the male loneliness epidemic here, but it is sort of a construct that a lot of people believe in that I personally do see as real. Although we have to remember that a big part of the male loneliness epidemic was self-inflicted by constructs that men said into the world. But of course, the male loneliness epidemic is a part of the bigger picture which we are talking about in this video, so I wanted to at least mention it. What we also see is decreased civic engagement. Traditional communities like religious organizations or volunteering are in decline. The reason for that is, of course, the internet. Everything happens online because it's faster, easier, and less stressful. And although I already said that you have less genuine connections, you still get some sort of connection, and it's much easier to achieve that. Dating is largely online, finding new friends, trends, and fame. The most likely path to fame nowadays would probably be an influencer, which happens online. And this next one is a bit of a double-edged sword because I don't know which way around it goes, but as we probably all know, and like I've already mentioned, rates of depression and anxiety are currently on the rise, which of course could be due to the fact that there's a lot more research on mental health and of course the falling stigma, but it might also be influenced by the loneliness epidemic. Like I said though, this one's a bit more tricky because I'm not sure which way around it goes. Does loneliness cause depression and anxiety, or does mental illness cause loneliness? It could be both ways. Either way, mental health plays a big part in this. And lastly, of course, the pandemic. Back then, I think for a lot of us, it was the loneliest that we'd ever felt because we simply were forced to isolate. And I'm pretty sure we haven't fully recovered from it. And I'm not sure if our brains ever will because many of us were, at that time, in a very important developmental stage, which is adolescence, or being a teenager, or becoming a young adult. But our becoming an adult and thus development was unfortunately interrupted by COVID. Alright, so now let's get into the next possible explanation for the loneliness epidemic. I know that there's been lots of videos about this, but this is sort of my special take because I think that we brought this upon ourselves, like the thumbnail already told you. Let's talk about isolation as a coping mechanism and why that is on the rise right now. We want to be alone. Remember the difference, alone doesn't mean lonely. It can, but it doesn't have to. We've probably all heard of the Gen Z stare. It's when young people stare at you distractedly or emotionlessly while you talk to them. And especially older people feel quite judged, but this also goes, of course, for younger generations. And this is just one of the many phenomena that we see in today's culture. We are being judged, filmed without consent, and then whatever we say is posted online. We are made fun of on social media and called cringe for the smallest of things. Now, I'm not saying that cringe culture in and on itself is a bad thing, but it does contribute to a lot of the problems that we have in regards to isolation. We feel uncomfortable connecting with people in real life because we are simply scared to do it, because we might be judged, and likely will be. We don't want to socialize because it's simply easier to isolate and not talk to other people because then we won't be judged. We would be in control. No rejections because we don't try. It's easier time-wise and money-wise because we don't have time and have to work a lot more, but it's also better for our mental health, at least in the short term. Because over time, it is inevitable that if we are a normal human being, we will crave connections again. Humans are social creatures. For some sooner and for some later, but the gap between desired and actual connection will grow. And that will lead us to feel lonely, because over time, the more that you avoid social interactions, the more scary they seem. The blanket we're hiding in becomes a cage. There is, by the way, such a thing as an introvert, someone who just generally likes to socialize less, but that doesn't mean that they don't like to socialize at all or that they don't need it in general. And that also doesn't mean that we constantly have to be around someone 24/7, always have to socialize, or that we need 20 friends, 7 partners, or whatever, but simply that purposefully avoiding social interactions will inevitably make us feel bad. Another reason we might avoid making friends specifically would be our focus on romantic relationships. It's always, what if I never find a girlfriend or a boyfriend or a partner, and rarely ever, what if I never have genuine friends? I mean, of course, some people do concern themselves with that, but most of them don't. Of course, it's easier to make friends than it is to find a lifelong partner, but still. For some people, their entire world revolves around making romantic partners, which in and on itself isn't anything bad, but it can lead to isolation. Personally, I've seen a lot of TikToks recently where a girl was like, I have a boyfriend, but I don't have any friends. I just crave these connections with friends because they simply put less effort into friendships than they do into romantic ones. I think if we truly want to, we can all make friends. I think, of course, there's that many people, and nowadays, there still are options. Yes, it's become harder and increasingly more dangerous, sort of, to make new friends, but it's not impossible. And I too have been recently trying to make some new friends, so let's talk about how you can do that. Here are some of my tips. So the first thing I would recommend you do is that you actually find yourself. I know this sounds very cliche, but it's true. You need to know your interests, who you truly are, even though of course you can figure out who you are along while finding friendships. It's just important that you do realize that you have a certain worth and all that kind of stuff. You know what I'm talking about, right? By the way, it's also okay to not have friends for a period of time, but I think it's important to still get out there, put yourself out there, and not waste any opportunities that you might have. But if you want to find actual friends right now, quickly, here's how to do it. There are lots of apps like Bumble, Yubo, and social media, TikTok or Instagram, for example. You can, for example, search up making friends in your city, and a lot of people who are looking for friends right now will come up, and then you can text them privately or even talk to people in the comments. Then there's events in your city. Speed friending is something that I think a lot of cities do. Of course, hobbies. There's also things that you can do, especially exercising, sports, there's running clubs, you can even try a new sport that you haven't done before just for the sake of making friends. Something I also really like is in real life book clubs. And I think the most obvious ways to find new friends if you're over the age of 18 would be pubs and bars. If possible, I think another way to make friends is over, for example, solo traveling. I know that a lot of us can't afford that right now, and we might not want to go out of our way to do that, or we simply might want to make friends in our city. Still, for me personally, I found my first friend solo traveling. So when I was in London a couple of months ago, I actually made a friend there, and I met her again in the Netherlands where she lives just a few days ago, and she's my new friend. I, by the way, met her over the app Nomad table, but there's also another one that's similar called Trip BFF. It's simply where you can make new friends traveling to new places. But still, I want to remind you guys that all of this doesn't fix our societal issues. It is still a problem that we're being judged. It is still a problem that our culture and society is increasingly more online and fast-paced in regards to living, which means less room for relationships. And it is hard to tell, but that's not what I want you guys to take from this video. In a way, society is falling apart, but it is also growing in many other ways. The general movement, I think, with lots of dips and ups, is still more acceptance and inclusivity. And the internet can still be used as a way to connect to others. And I'm not saying this in a way to like use social media to just have lots of online friends and never meet someone in real life, but to actually get in contact with someone and then meet them in real life. That should always be the goal in my opinion. Or not always, but usually. And I also personally don't believe that we're doomed. What I do believe, however, is that slowly over the last few years, there has been a major shift in society. It seems like the world is more focused on themselves, which, for example, the main character syndrome could be involved in. Most people live in their own bubble and simply want to succeed for their own gain, which of course, we are inherently selfish because that's sort of what keeps us alive, but still. What might help is going back to the basics. Kindness, less isolation, and more connection. There is no exact plan to follow or rules to make, but I believe that we as a society can connect again by using the internet as our advantage. I don't believe that we have to abolish it altogether, but that we can use it to connect as a society. Okay, that was for the video. This was a much longer video than I usually make, and it was kind of exhausting. My voice sort of got a bit raspy towards the end, but I really hope that you enjoyed it. If you liked the video, leave a like. If you want to say anything, if you disagree or agree, let me know in the comments. Thank you guys again for, I think, 585 subscribers right now. It really means the world to me. If you want to buy my book, it's in the description. Follow me on Instagram or TikTok where I post other things. And yeah, if you want to hire me to edit your video, look in the description. There is my Fiverr profile. Alright, that was it for the video. I really hope that you enjoyed it. Bye!